Hey guys, so far we've been working on blueprint updates for our character, but I'm looking around at our world here, and really, it's looking pretty dull and drab and gray. So we're going to pivot, start working on our level environment, and the very first thing that we're going to work on is our landscape. Welcome to today's episode, and today we're setting up our very first landscape. Think of a landscape as a base layer of canvas that we're painting on, except on top of that layer, we're going to have a three-dimensional canvas. So ideally, we're going to have as little of the landscape showing up in the world as possible, because the landscape is basically a two-dimensional flat image. It's like a floor of the world. And there is a way to make the landscape look 3D using something called virtual height maps, and it basically simulates a three-dimensional landscape. But the problem is that using virtual height maps, it doesn't accurately reflect collision. So for example, if my player is walking in the world and there's a rock jutting out of the landscape, the player's foot's going to go right through it. So instead, we're going to have all sorts of foliage and 3D stuff on top of our landscape. But regardless, we need to have that base layer. And that's what we're going to create this episode, but we're also going to sculpt the shape of it as well. And that's going to set us up to be able to paint our landscape in the next episode using our landscape layers. The very last thing we're going to do this episode is use an engine feature that's called Quixel Bridge to bring in our first new material into the world so that we're ready to hit the ground running, setting up what we need for the next episode. So here are our key concepts this episode. We're going to do a quick overview of what a level is. It's kind of obvious, but I want to go over it anyway. And then we're going to cover everything to do with landscapes. And the last thing we're going to do is go over Quixel Bridge and what a material is. So let's get to it. All right, so in our last episode, we did a lot with blueprints, and we're not going to touch blueprints for a few episodes. So we're pivoting completely, and we're talking about our actual level. And the very first thing I want to go over is what is a level. And if you go up to the top left corner under the File menu, you have this new level and open level, and if I go to new level, I can actually create all these different kinds of levels. And so what is a level? So think of a level as just an individual loadable level within your game, right? So your game can have a single level. It can have multiple levels where you start level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. That's typical progression. But it could also have these little microcosms. You could have a main level, but then you could also have like another level where you take a portal and you get to that and all that sort of stuff. And so with our initial level that the game comes with, I'm basically conceiving this as a construct. And if you've ever seen the original Matrix, I'm not talking about the new ones, I'm talking about the old school 99, I think it's 98, 99, something like that. Yeah. And Neo wakes up with the thing in the back of his head, and Morpheus is there, and he goes, "This is the construct," in his amazing Morpheus voice. But basically, the idea of a construct in the Matrix is it's a place where they can load whatever they need for whatever they're about to do. And so I'm thinking of this initial level in that same respect. Like, it's not going to reflect the entire game world of the role-playing game I have in mind, but it is going to be large enough and sufficient enough that we can load in just about anything to test out gameplay. We could test out the design of new features and things like that. So I basically want like a playground, but not only that, I'd like a beautiful playground. And that's what we're going to make with this first level. That's really my goal and my vision with the next few episodes. So how do we start building our construct? Well, the first thing we got to do is we got to start making some space. So as much as I love you, our old monster truck ramp, I'm going to select and delete. And basically, we got to clear out everything that's currently in this world. But there's a few things I want to preserve, just a few. I want to preserve this middle piece for now, and it's actually several pieces. And then at least one of these blue cubes, because they're active physics actors in the world. I want to preserve one just to serve as a reference for the future. So I'm going to place one right on top of there. And then everything else in the world, you know, you can either delete individually by just selecting, but you can also delete multiple things at once by, for example, you select the top option and hold shift and select the bottom option. And you can also unselect certain thing by holding control and left clicking in the world, and that'll unselect something. So let's say I want to keep the floor and it's got the other 4 walls, and then I can hit delete on my keyboard. And you could do the same thing for each of the categories here. So let's say the cylinder, we want to delete that. And so I'm just going to hold Shift, click, select everything in between, delete. And the same thing for, let's say, block 2 over here. I'm going to hold all these, delete. And the same thing for block 1. Actually, no, block 1 is what we're keeping. That's the main deal. This guy over here, that's block 3. Select all those, delete. And I can also delete out those folders. So I can just select, delete, delete, delete. And be careful you don't accidentally delete something. One feature you should definitely know, one keyboard shortcut, is under Edit, you can undo delete elements here. And that's just Control-Z on your keyboard. That's one of my most common keyboard shortcuts. Make mistakes all the time. And we could delete out the remaining 2 physics actors. And finally, we're going to delete out our floor. Oh, goodness gracious me. That's jarring, isn't it? The very last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to reposition all of this stuff to really be in the very center of the world. So if I select the big cube here, and if I go over to the right-hand side, you see the location under the details panel. You see the location is actually 1200, 1700. I'm going to actually change that to 0, 0. And that's going to put it right in the center of the world. You know, these I'm going to delete. I don't need those. And I'm just going to select the rest. We're going to hold Control for everything, including the blue cube. And I'm just going to move that over, reposition that to be directly adjacent to the main block. And that's where those grid lines can be really helpful, because you can make sure that it's precisely aligned. So I can just snap it into place. And that looks good right there. Do I got it in all 3? Yep, I think all the dimensions, it's good. So we can go ahead and save our world there. So now it's time to bring in our landscape. But how do we do that? So one feature that I basically glazed over, I didn't even talk about it all in episode 3, was this select mode here. But for the first time, we're going to go into a different mode here on the left-hand side, and we're going to go into our landscape mode. And from the landscape mode, this is where we can import landscapes, we can create a landscape, we can sculpt a landscape, and we can paint our landscape. And really, we're going to be focused on the first 2 tabs up here. First, bringing in a landscape, creating one from scratch, and then sculpting it just a bit. And so on the Manage tab, we're going to create a new landscape. There are third-party programs out there where you can basically sculpt a landscape like mountains and stuff, and then you can import it from a file right from here. We're not going to do that. We're going to stick right in the engine here, especially for this construct level that we're creating. Then we have this setting for Enable Edit Layers. And for this, I definitely want to check it, because this is what's going to enable us in our next episode to actually paint our landscape with different materials on different parts of the landscape. Then we have this setting for World Partition. And World Partition is a brand new feature to Unreal Engine 5, and it's what allows us to have a truly open-ended world in a game. And although we're not going to use this in this level because it's a small level, it's just a construct, we're definitely going to use it in our main level for our game. And then we have our material. And this is just our initial material for the landscape, so this is going to change next episode, but we can select an initial material. And what I found to look the best initially is this M-ground moss. So I'll select that there. And then the last setting we have to change is our location, because if I kind of go down here, I can see that our landscape is virtually cutting directly through this block. And that's because our Z is set to 100. Just going to set that to 0 instead at our base level. And so our landscape will be at the base of our block then. Yeah, that looks good. And we have some other settings here for section size, sections per component. You can have some pretty massive landscapes, but I think for the purpose of what we're doing here, 63 by 63 is going to be more than enough. So then I'll go ahead and create. And it might take a couple of seconds, but there's our landscape. And we have our moss layer here. And that's the material, that's basically the skin of the landscape that we're seeing. And I can zoom all the way out. And at this point, you know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my camera speed to a little bit faster. I'm going to switch it to 6, and that's going to make it a lot easier to see. Now you see that our first issue here is that our landscape is entirely flat, right? Like the material is pretty varied. It's one of the things I like about this moss material, and we'll go into it in more detail. But the actual land is completely flat. You know, there's no variation in the geometry, in the geography whatsoever. So we're going to vary that up. So we've got some features here like sculpting, erasing, smoothing, flattening. And the first thing we're actually going to do is we're going to give our landscape some noise just to make it a little bit more unique and varied. But let me just go through the features here. So sculpting, this is what fundamentally like creates mountains. Like if I just hold my left click and I click and I drag and I create like some mountains, and I can Control Z to undo that pretty quick. And erasing, it's the same idea, but the opposite. It erases height data. So if I sculpt and then I go here and I erase, then then it flattens things right back out to the original landscape height. And I'm just gonna undo all that. Smoothing, so if you have a very rough area and you want to smooth it out, that's exactly what it sounds like. Flattening, just flattens it completely, gives it a... So smoothing, for example, would preserve kind of the gradient, but just smooth out the roughening. But flatten would literally flatten, make it completely flat. And ramp, you get the idea. Erosion, hydro, these two are pretty unique, that they can give some variation to the landscape. Like if you create a mountain and you just want to make it look more realistic. But there's some other really neat features that are available in the engine. Something called landmass, where Epic Games has created within the engine a mechanism for like randomly generating mountains and stuff like that. And we'll eventually cover that, but not right now. So let's cover noise for a moment. So what I'd like to do with noise is basically have a very gentle noise, and we're not creating any giant mountains or hills on this level, but I just want some gentle variability throughout the entire level. And you see that within the viewport here, I have this what's called a brush, and the highlighted area, that's my brush size, and you can see the fall off of it, like how intense it is. And that's the brush size here and the brush fall off. And I'm going to keep that to about 0.5, but what we're going to do is we're going to increase the size to 10,000. So we're just making a much bigger brush. And what you'll notice is if I zoom out, that's a good thing to do here. And I do this, like look at, oh man, that noise is pretty intense, right? So very quickly I can get some pretty intense jarring looking mountains. So we don't want that. So I'm going to do Control Z. So what we got to do is we got to lower our tool strength. So I played around with this a bit, and the tool strength that I found that works the best is about 0.003. But the other thing I'm going to do here is to randomize this a little bit more. So it's not just this like random circle where I'm raising the elevation slightly. I'm going to select a different brush here. And I found that this star one, so it's basically like a different shape of the randomization. And you see it kind of randomizing as I go around. So then I'm going to hold left click and I'm just going to drag that all around our level. So I'm going to zoom out quite a bit, and then I'm just going to hold left click and drag it all around. Your system might hold up here a little bit, but that's okay. So if you keep doing it, you just go around and around and around, and it is gonna randomize quite a bit over time. And once you've done it for a few seconds, then I'm gonna zoom back in, and we're just gonna take a look and see what that looks like. So now it basically looks perfectly flat still, right? But if you look just very subtly, you will see places where it's higher and places that it's lower. And if you want to increase the variation there, so we could raise that to maybe like a 6, right? And if we do that again, I just go over kind of randomly all over. Let's see what that looks like now. So now it's a little bit more obvious. See, it's a little bit higher in one place, a little bit lower. So you could play with this, right? You can get it to exactly what you think is right. And you can even see in my middle area here that it got raised up quite a bit relative to the actual block. So now what I want to do, basically the idea I have for this construct is we're going to build a garden. And the very center of the garden, I'm going to have a lake, and then I'm going to have 2 rivers that, basically 4 rivers that intersect into the lake from the 4 corners of the garden. So that's what I'm going to sculpt here. But you could follow along with these techniques and sculpt just about any level you like. So the way we're going to do that is back on the Sculpt tool in the landscape mode on the left-hand side, I'm going to change our brush strength to something a lot smaller here. So I'm changing it to about 1,000. And then the tool strength, I'm also increasing that to about 0.05. And I'm going to change the brush to a simple circular brush. And now I'm going to sculpt out a lake, but I do want to have something in the very center of our lake. So I'm going to keep this block here for now, and that's kind of our landmark, our placeholder for what's the center of our lake. And so one thing you'll notice is if you hold left click, it makes everything higher up, and I'm going to Control Z. But one technique I really like is if you hold shift and then left click, it lowers things in the same way. And so I'm just going to do some even brush strokes around our center island there. And I'm just going to keep doing that. And actually, if I position myself directly above, like looking straight down, that's probably the best way to do this. So just left clicking, but holding shift and then doing circles around that just to get a lowering effect, sculpting wise. That looks pretty good. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit play to see what this looks like. And I see in the top left, I've got this can't edit landscapes in Pi, and that just means the player editor. I can't edit landscapes in there. But I'm looking around, and yeah, that's pretty good. We got a little pond, and I think we're ready to continue sculpting. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create 4 rivers that basically start from each of the corners of our landscape and run directly into our lake in the center. And I played with this a little bit, and to get the effect I'm looking for, I need the tool strength at about 0.8 and the brush size to about 400. So it's actually quite small. You can think of these more like streams rather than rivers. But we are in a garden, so it's not a full-size landscape or anything like that. But we just want the effect of having a stream run through and kind of an S pattern all the way to the lake. And also one thing about the stream, just to get the desired visual effect in the end, make sure we've got enough bending in the stream that you can't really see past the bend if there's like tall foliage like trees or something like that. And I'll show you what I mean here. So I set my tool strength to 0.8, my brush size to 400. We're keeping the brush fall off exactly the same. And I'm still holding shift to lower the land. And we're just going to do one smooth brush stroke. So hold shift, click, and we're just going through. And you should see something like this slowly draw itself over time. And you want to do this in one clean stroke. So you see how I messed up there? I'm just going to do Control Z because I really need to zoom out all the way. And I really should be directly above where I want to do this. So let's do this one more time. I'll hold shift and select and drag it out. And I want to keep going at an even speed as much as possible so that the river is not so it's basically the same height, same elevation in each area. So you don't want the S's to be like so bendy where it's You just want kind of a single smooth S or an S and a half there. So now I'm going to quickly do this for the other 4 corners, and I'll speed up this video. All right, we got our 4 rivers, but how do we smooth this out a bit? The best way I found of doing this is we can reduce our tool strength down to something like 0.3. Oh, messed that up. 0.3. And then we can go over the areas that are a little jarring. So this, see if I see there, it's like it looks like Morse code kind of. And then we can just hold shift and we can smooth it out a little bit just by going over it one more time. And that'll lower everything, but it does smooth it out because we're basically only running over the areas that seem kind of bumpy. Yeah, this is another example there. And again, I should be directly over it when I'm doing this. That helps. Right over here, same kind of thing. Oh, messed that up. So that's it for the sculpting side of what we have in mind initially. But the main issue we've got here is everything looks exactly the same, right? We got moss over that base layer for basically everything. And ideally, we want a different material for our riverbed for the bottom of our layer here. But also, we want a different material for each of the quadrants that I've got here. So I'm going to have one quadrant that's mainly like a stone-based garden and another one that's more like flowers and a field and stuff like that. So we need different materials. And so now we're going to cover how you can find materials via this gigantic library of content that's accessible through Unreal Engine's Quixel bridge. And to do this, I'm going to leave the landscape mode just for a moment, go to Select, and the button directly next to Select Mode is this Import Content. or bring in content from various sources. The first option is import content. So if we have something from on our hard drive, something we got from an outside source, that's how you would use it. But then we have this Quixel bridge, and that's what we're going to go into here. So Quixel Bridge is this giant library of content that Epic Games simply has, and it's all there, all for free, as long as you use it inside Unreal Engine. And there's 3D assets, so everything you can think of as an asset, but then there's also things like plants and surfaces. And the surfaces here on the left-hand side, these are the materials that I was just talking about. And this is what I'm going to show you how to bring in first. But there's a lot of other stuff that we're going to bring in from Quixel Bridge in future episodes. So the first thing is you've got to log in to Quixel Bridge the same way you typically log into your Epic Games account. So in the top right corner, you would just go to sign in, and you could sign in with Epic Games here. Once you sign in, you'll see everything loads, and then you're ready to go. So we're just going to bring in one material for this episode, but in the next episode, we're going to bring in 3 or 4 additional materials. And I'm going to show you how we can create a landscape material with paintable layers that we can begin painting our landscape. So what I'm going to choose for my material, if I just search for grass here, and there's a ton of grasses if you scroll down, I'm going to choose one that's kind of a darker grass, and we're going to keep going down here. Just see just how much content truly is here. So this looks pretty neat, this clover patches. I'm going to choose that. And if I select that, clover patches, oh, there we go. So when we select a material, we have the ability of choosing the quality with which we want to download. And for some of these materials in the future, especially when we're using these materials on static meshes, like a wall or something, I'm definitely going to pick the highest quality. That's an 8K texture. And that's really nice because with Nanite, which is a feature of Unreal Engine, you can really get close to a texture that's super high quality, super high density, and see the full material, see the full effect of that, and zoom out and still get reasonable performance when using those massive textures. But for the case of our landscape, because with the landscape we don't actually have the 3D geometry, like we're not going to have clover physically sticking out of our grass landscape. I think high quality is sufficient there because I never want to have the camera so close to the landscape that the player can see that, oh, that's not a real kind of landscape, and it's not 3D, right? It's just kind of a flat surface. So high quality I think will be sufficient here. So I'll select that and download. And depending on the speed of your internet, materials are pretty quick to download, should only take a few seconds, maybe a minute tops. And then once you've downloaded that, you can add it to your project here. And once you add it, you're going to see a new content browser automatically pop up with that new material. And the content browser is basically the same exact thing as the content drawer in the bottom left-hand corner. You can actually launch a separate content browser just by right-clicking on any folder here and then selecting Show a New Content Browser. And I'm going to talk about all of this, but let's just close out of this and we'll close out of Quixel Bridge. We'll come back to our level here. And if you navigate to the content drawer, and I'll go back to our main content folder, you'll now see that you have 2 brand new folders here. You have Megascans and MS Presets. Now let's cover MS Presets first, but even before then, let's back up for a moment. So Megascans is basically the library of Unreal Engine content. And originally that content's from a company called Quixel, and what Quixel did is they went all across the world and they scanned all these different locations, these assets, everything from materials to actual geometry like rocks and things like that. And so a lot of the content comes from that original company, Quixel. But Unreal Engine acquired Quixel, and now Megascans really is that entire library of free content. And so whenever you download Megascans content, you automatically get what's called the MS Presets folder, Megascans Presets. If I go into that, it's a number of default materials. And we'll get more into this in the next episode, but materials are broken into what are called parent materials and child materials. And child materials are often called material instances. But the idea is that you can have a very complex material. So just to give you an example, if I go into this default material and you have this graph, and that might not look all that complicated, but if I go into this adjustments, then we're getting into something pretty crazy, right? So Megascans has all these default materials that, quite frankly, we don't really have to modify very much because they work so well out of the box. But if I go back to our content drawer And if I go back now to our content and then the Megascans folder, so this is where all the child materials will come in, things that we actually download. And so there's different kinds of materials. So there's surfaces, which the clover on grass that we just downloaded is an example of that. But there's also things like decals, which are materials on top of materials, like a poster could be on top of a wall, things like that. And you'll see other folders appear here as we proceed through our series. But if I select surfaces here, and I go into clover patches on grass, so this is our child material. This is what's called the material instance. And these child materials that we download from Quixel Bridge, they're always going to come with 3 textures that you see here. So one is our base color. This is actually what the material looks like. But then to give it proper lighting and shadow, we need 2 other things. One is the normal map, which is basically the height map. It's basically the height of each of the grass petals and all that data to make it lit properly. And the last one is something called ambient occlusion, which is how ambient lighting affects the texture. And so basically just downloading these 3 things, if I go into our child material, the child material contains those 3 files, but then all the work, the heavy duty work of generating that material is done in this default MS Presets MS Surface material. That's the parent material that we talked about earlier. So that's a 40,000 foot view of how the material structure works within Unreal Engine, but we're going to get into this much more in the next episode. So I'll close out of our surface material and our clover patches on grass. And so now let's experiment putting this on our landscape. So on the right hand side in our world outliner, our landscape is actually divided into many different pieces here. And if you select a piece, you'll see that highlight in the world. And that's being generated from world partition that's now automatically part of Unreal Engine 5. So if I scroll up and select our very top landscape streaming proxy and hold Shift and then select the bottom, I can highlight all of them. And then down here, if I scroll down on the right hand side, this is where we have our landscape material that we gave when we created the landscape. And we can change this out. So if I come down to our content drawer and I drag in our clover patches on grass, and voila, all of a sudden we've got a completely different landscape material. But something weird's going on, right? So let's hit play and let's see what's going on. So if I zoom in very close, I'm going to zoom into my character. So up close, the material actually looks pretty nice, right? I can actually see the grass and the clover patches, and the way it's being shaded there on the side looks really nice. But then the problem is, as I zoom out, so it's doing something called tiling. It's basically taking that base texture and then just repeating it in a standard pattern across the landscape. And obviously we don't want that to happen. And if you remember, when I selected the moss material, it didn't tile like that. We have this completely randomized pattern across the landscape. So this is exactly what we're going to get into next episode. I'm going to show you how to use that moss material and some other tricks I know to truly randomize the look and feel of materials. And then also within landscape mode under paint, I'm going to show you how we can paint our different quadrants of our landscape here, each a different material using Quixel Bridge materials. And the last thing we're going to cover is how to automate part of that painting in our landscape based on the height data. So for example, based on the rivers and the lakes being lower to the ground, underneath the ground relative to the core ground, that's going to automatically be painted across our landscape with a different material. And so I hope to see you there in our next episode.